Every time there is a wave of scandals, there are calls for business schools to do something about it, and there is a string of articles in the business literature with titles such as "Are B Schools to Blame?" "Does an MBA make you unethical?" Finally, some evidence that it does. I really like this header for an article by Luigi Zingales, "Do business schools incubate criminals?" And if you look at the cartoon, it illustrates, oh, we're teaching them all this other stuff. Oh, the ethics, that's just a tiny little pamphlet. And what that suggests is that if we were to teach them ethics, that would address the problem. And the question I want to address is that true? Can we make our MBAs more ethical by teaching them more ethics? There are reasons to doubt. This book came out a year ago in which this guy argues that nobody is ever going to invent an ethics class that makes people behave ethically after they step out of the classroom. Now, this guy wrote that, and then he came to Stern for a year, and then they hired him, and they put him in charge of the ethics class. So he does regret his words slightly in that if he'd thought more carefully, he would have said, nobody is ever going to invent a standalone ethics class that makes people behave ethically a year after they step out of the classroom. That, I do believe, is true. So I think I'll go through the reasons for why I believe that. I think there is something that we can do, though. If we were to rethink moral education from an evolutionary point of view, I think there's actually quite a lot that we can do. So let's talk briefly about moral development. This is my son Max at the age of 2. Now, I'm sure that Paul Bloom or other folks with complicated equipment could have found moral motives in Max at age 2, but I didn't see much of it. Here he is with his cheddar bunnies, and I could never, ever get him to share. But then, so that was his common response. But then just 4 years later, here's my son Max at the age of 6. Not only is he excellent at sharing, but the other day I was having a talk with him about the pirates in Peter Pan. And I said, no, pirates are always bad. They always cheat. They're always bad. And he didn't stop and think about it for a while. He just instantly came back with this question. But Daddy, if pirates are always bad, then why don't they help other pirates who helped them be bad? That is a pretty sophisticated understanding of reciprocity. Now, where did that come from? How does morality get into the head? It appears to not be there when they're little, and then it's there. And almost the whole history of moral psychology hinges on your answer to that question. How did it get in? There are 3 major theories. Theory 1 is empiricism. We learned it from the outside. So there's a Freudian version, which is that it came through me when Max resolved his Oedipal complex and identified with me. That's when he took in my morality. Or the Skinnerian kind, that because my wife and I have rewarded him and punished him for certain things, that's what then turned him into the semi-ethical creature that he is today. Well, that's theory 1. Theory 2, which has been so theory 1 was the dominant one for the 20th century up until the 1970s and 80s. From the sort of the 60s through the 90s, the dominant theory was theory 2 from Piaget and then Kohlberg, which emphasized that children self-construct their understandings. It was a very positive, child-centered theory. Morality isn't in them to begin with, nor is it stuck in their heads from outside. Rather, as Max interacts with other kids, he learns the power of reciprocity. Oh, how would I feel if I were you? Well, she cries when I do this. So interacting with other kids is what drove Max's moral development. That is theory 2. Now, no one has ever come up with an ethics class based either on theory 1 or theory 2 that's been shown to work. Certainly with rewards and punishments, you can change children's behavior, but that doesn't work nearly as well with adults. Kohlbergian methods based on theory 2, there's not any evidence that I've ever found that shows that training kids in moral dilemmas and how to solve moral dilemmas, that affects their behavior out of the classroom. I've never, if anyone knows of any such findings, please let me know, but I've never heard of research demonstrating that this works. Theory 3, the one that I endorse, is nativism. It is that nature provides a first draft. There is a first draft of our mind. So there's Darwin and E.O. Wilson, who both argued for nativist approaches to ethics, placing the active ingredient primarily in the emotions, as several speakers have pointed out. Richard Dawkins, Matt Ridley, many others have worked out the implications certainly of reciprocal altruism, kin selection, a few other very simple processes can be expected to have put into us certain emotional systems, as Trivers worked out for reciprocal altruism. So there's a first draft. Now, many people resisted this because it seemed reductionist or Many people just don't like nativism. But I think, and again, as I said in my opening remarks, nativist theories are so much better today than they were 10 or 20 years ago, because we've had things like Pete and Rob Boyd's book, Not by Genes Alone. Here's an expanded statement of modern nativism from Gary Marcus. Nature provides a first draft, which experience then revises. Built-in does not mean unmalleable. It means organized in advance of experience. I can't stress this enough, especially in teaching to undergrads. They seem to think that if something is variable around the world, then it's not innate. Or if it's changeable, then it's not innate. And that was only true on a very simplistic notion in which innate means hardwired. But innate does not mean hardwired. It just means there's a first draft. That's all. And that first draft is malleable. We can do so much with this. So this is the first draft of the moral mind. A lot of my research has been on, okay, what are these intuitions? What's built in? And my research team at yourmorals.org, our conclusion is there are at least these 6 foundations. There's more, but these are the 6 that we've studied. There's a lot of other stuff. I mean, if you're a nativist, you sort of give up parsimony. I'm actually an anti-parsimonist. I'm opposed to the pursuit of parsimony. I take Occam very literally. Let's pursue truth. If 2 theories are equally good at describing reality, take the simpler, but don't pursue simplicity. Whoever made us didn't give a damn about simplicity. So stop pursuing simplicity in psychology. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in the head, at least these 6 moral foundations. Now, the whole field of moral psychology has focused on 2. The whole field of moral psychology is politically liberal, very politically liberal. And liberal morality is based on care, compassion, empathy, and then also fairness and justice and equality. Of course, those are important. Of course, those are important in the workplace. So those are important, but there's a lot more. And here we have a big left-right divide. Conservatives, traditional societies. I came to this from working with Richard Schwader, doing research in India. Most societies care about a much broader range of moral concerns. And so if we were to rethink moral education from an evolutionary point of view, what that means is principle 1, use the whole first draft. There's a lot of stuff in that first draft. Don't leave money on the table. Don't ignore so much of the moral foundations that are in our head. For example, use loyalty, a sense of honor and loyalty, that you would be betraying your institution, your school, something I hope we'll be talking about things we can do at Stern. If a sense of honor and group honor can be emphasized or can be part of the culture, then people would have a sense of betrayal and letting down their fellows. A sense of authority, order, and tradition. A sense of sanctity, for example, to sanctify integrity, reputation, honor. There are so many things that we can make part of our culture so that after 2 years here, maybe there will be some residue. There will be something in their heads. And that brings me to the second point. How are we going to, if we're going to build on these, how are we going to do it? Are we just going to lecture to our students? We're going to teach them, do cases in class that will show the value of these principles? No, that won't be terribly effective. And the reason is because there are at least 2 kinds of mental processes. Almost everything that goes on in our heads is automatic. Our brains are neural networks, or they're pattern matchers. Our brains are like those of other animals for the most part. Our cognition is intuitive, automatic. Now, we also have this ability to think in words, to think logically, to do controlled processes, but this isn't more than one thing going on in your head at a time. You can't do many of those things at a time, whereas you can do thousands of other things in your head at the same time that are automatic. The key point here is that the automatic processes are connected to motivation. When language came along, evolution didn't rewire our brains and say, oh, we've got this new language ability. Let's rewire all the neural circuits to connect the reasoning circuits in the language areas, to connect those to the motivational circuits, the subcortical motivational circuits. That didn't happen. And this is why great truth number 1, I have a book, The Happiness Hypothesis, about 10 ancient ideas and whether or not they're true. Great truth number 1, the foundation of all pop psychology, or a lot of it, is the divided self. As Medea puts it in Ovid's Metamorphosis, I am dragged along by a strange new force. Desire and reason are pulling in different directions. I see the right way and approve it, but follow the wrong. And the sorts of dilemmas that we're going to send our students out into, yes, we can teach them to recognize the right way, but there's not much reason to think that's going to cause them to follow the right way. So if you accept this architecture of a rider that the mind is like a rider on an elephant, How should we do moral education? Well, we can lecture the rider, but as I've said, there's not much reason to think that that works. Again, I've never found evidence. I've never seen a study that reported evidence that this actually worked. The text below, in my book, when I explained why no one will invent an ethics class, this is what I then went on to say. Classes are for riders, and riders are just going to use their new knowledge to serve their elephants more effectively. So I don't think that's the way to do it. Much more effective would be to train the elephant. If you want to make people behave more ethically, there are two ways you can go. You can change the elephant, which takes a long time and is hard to do. But people who've been to Catholic schools, especially residential, where you've been living with the nuns, et cetera, for many years, people often do report that something stays. They have gut feelings that are different because they went to Catholic school, or they were in the Army, they went through boot camp, they've spent years in the services. So if you have enough time and control, I think you can train the elephant. Or the third way is you can change the path that the elephant and rider find themselves traveling on. When Chip and Dan Heath wrote their book Switch, they took my metaphor about the rider and the elephant. They asked me if they could have it. I said, take my metaphor, please. And they improved it. They said, it's not just the rider and the elephant. They said, you can teach people to change the path. And I thought, oh my God, that's so obvious. Why didn't I think of that? But it's great. Again, ideas, ideas having sex, books having sex, and what comes out is better than the original ideas were. So we can teach people to do ethical systems engineering. I'll just say briefly about how to train the elephant. Note that it takes a long time. In a one-semester class, we have something on the order of 36 hours of class time. I don't think you can train the elephant in 36 hours, certainly not in a way that 3 years from now, when they're faced with pressure to do something wrong, they're going to say, oh, no, my gut tells me not to do it, therefore I'm going to stand up to you because I had an ethics class. But if we think about the entire 2 years that students spend in an MBA program, well, now we're talking about the right amount of time. In 2 years, I think you can change the elephant, especially if you think about it this way. When you're new any place, you're trying to learn a new culture, and you're really receptive to how are things done here? How do people dress? How do they talk? What's cool? Who's cool? So if we think about our incoming students in the first week or two, especially in the first month or two, they're trying to learn what is it to be a business student? What is it to be a Stern student, let's say? Well, here's a handy definition of culture from Pete and Rob. Culture is information capable of affecting individuals' phenotype that they acquire from other conspecifics by teaching, imitation, and other forms of social learning. So this is what we should be after, enculturating them, paying very close attention to our culture in our business schools, and thinking what we can do. So if we think about behavioral variance that we want to encourage versus discourage, and we think about a population of these variants, these phenotypical variants, ways of behaving as a business student, we need to cultivate certain healthier cultures and rather than other less healthy cultures. So careful selection of initial population, absolutely. As we've seen many times today, there are individual differences. So in admissions, are we focusing just on GMATs and GREs and grades, or are there other features we might want to select for? Of course, individuals learn. This is a lot of the study of cultural evolution is with balance between learning for yourself versus copying. So when people learn that cutting corners gets them a good grade and they get away with it, well, that's learning. We've got to watch out for those things. There are conformist biases. People will do what those around them are doing. They're prestige biases. They'll copy whoever's prestigious. Direct instruction from the faculty and others, and modeling from the faculty. This is an image of a new thing we have here at Stern called Launch. It's a week-long intensive program that has the students go through a lot of experiences together. It's an attempt really to socialize them. Ethics has not yet played a role in Launch, but as of next year, I'll be giving a talk in it. I'll be starting that process. So at least we're trying to get some ethics into Launch, and then they don't really hear about it again until their second year, but we're working on that. So principle number 2, train and enculturate the elephant. So again, this is part of rethinking ethics education from an evolutionary point of view. The problem, though, is that if you just focus on training the elephant, well, the elephant responds to social forces. That's what it does for a living, much of what it does for a living. And I'm a social psychologist. We are experts in studying how people respond to social forces. This is an image from the famous Asch experiments. Here's a guy who knows that one line is longer than another. Is he going to say so? Well, sometimes he does, but other times he's a reed in the wind. And when the wind blows, he bends and calls it as they see it. Here's scenes from the famous Milgram experiment. Will these real subjects say, no, I will not press a button to give an electric shock to a man who's screaming and demanding to be let out? Well, occasionally, sometimes they do, but most of the time they are reeds in the wind and they press the button. These are images from the Zimbardo prison study. Same thing. These are images from the Zimbardo prison study that was done in Abu Ghraib prison. Same thing. So, given how responsive the elephant is to social pressures, and given that in these classic experiments, what was the social pressure? It was an experimenter who they will never see again, who has no power over them, will not affect their fate, and yet most people succumb. And we're expecting our MBA students to go out into the world and stand up to their supervisors and bosses who have control over whether their children have health insurance or not. If they're fired, their family suffers. And we're expecting them to be much more courageous than the subjects in the Milgram, Zimbardo, and Ash experiments. Not likely to happen. So, to get the most bang for our buck, if we really want to improve business ethics, prevent a next wave of scandals, I think we need to focus our efforts on number 3, change the path. And that's why Bruce and I and a few other people, Becca Fraser, we created a website called ethicalsystems.org. The guiding idea is that the best way to improve ethical behavior is to change the path. The second best way is to change the elephant, and the least effective way is to train the rider. What we're trying to do, and Coriana is working with me on this, is we're trying to bring together, we have a bunch of people so far who joined on, Bob Frank, Steve Blader, and we'll be inviting many of you to join or contribute in any way that you can. And this is where the main work of the site gets done. We have tabs for all the major areas where there is research. There's research on pay and promotion. If you pay for performance, what are the ethical problems that arise? There's research, so much research on fairness. How can you create a culture in which people have a sense of trust that there's procedural justice? And there's research on compliance programs, conflicts of interest. So if we can gather all the academic research, so that we actually have some evidence-based recommendations about what works to change climates, to change environments, and then we can create courses to teach ethical systems design, and people at MBA, at business schools all over the country, all over the world, work together to try out different courses and then come up with some measures of actual follow-up. That'll be tricky, but if we can figure out ways to actually measure the effectiveness of these various interventions, my hope is we can prevent the next wave of ethical scandals, or at least we can make a dent. We can avoid those headlines about do business schools make things worse. So what I'm saying is let's do ethical systems design on business schools. These are books by the speakers here today. We've all been working on projects related to this. And so to summarize, what if we rethink moral education from an evolutionary point of view? Well, principle 1, we'll use the whole first draft of the moral mind. Principle 2, we're going to train and enculturate the elephant over the 2 years, not just the 36 hours. And principle 3, we're going to teach our students about social psychology, evolution, and institutions. We're going to teach them ethical systems design. So, do business schools breed bad ethics? I think the answer is perhaps. And if we play our cards right, they can breed good ethics. Thank you.